fired up. It's made a great decision.
Great teammates, coaches, and other people who want to be Super Bowl champions. And we are. We're going to do it this year.
And we're going places because we want to go places.
Touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're here to do something a little bit different. This video is probably going to be a little bit shorter. I don't know, actually. We're just kind of winging this one. But I wanted to do a video on this just to take a little bit of a look. We have 6 games left in this Lions season. It's flying by. And I wanted to kind of update where the Lions are currently at in this playoff race. What needs to happen so that the Lions can make the playoffs, so what we're kind of looking forward to, even though I'm not going to give you an exact scenario because there's a lot of different scenarios that could happen, and I'm not going to try to map out every scenario of how the Lions can get in, but just take a look at what we should be looking for these next few weeks, what the Lions need to have happen to pretty much get into the playoffs, and then also an update on this Rams draft pick selection. It's actually our draft pick, but from the Rams, because it's pretty high right now, and it may continue to be that way with some of the things that they're dealing with. So we're going to touch on that as well. Now, before we get into any of that, as you can see, we're already on this playoff screen. Before we get into any of that, I do want to first touch on some updates with the Detroit Lions in terms of injuries. Starting off with Jameson Williams and Romeo, who are currently in their 21-day window to return to the team off of IR. They get 21 days. If you don't activate them off of IR within that time to the active roster, then they are out for the season. Currently, both of these guys, I believe, are 8 days in to this window. And according to Dan Campbell, who told us this on Monday, a lot can change. But on Monday, he said that it would be a tall order for either of those two guys to play in this Jacksonville Jaguars game. It seemed like they were kind of aiming for the Jaguars when he said it initially, but that was, I think, a week ago. It's understandable that, they may be a little bit off with that, but he's saying it's a tall order. Didn't count it out, but he said it would take a lot for either of those two guys to play. So it sounds unlikely that we see Jameson or Romeo this weekend. But of course, by the time it's this Jacksonville Jaguars game, that would be 13 days in, if my math is correct, of this 21-day window, which means that the next game in Minnesota would be 20 days, or in Detroit, but versus Minnesota would be 20 days into their window, which seems pretty likely that if they are going to come back, it would be before the Vikings game. Now, technically, I don't think they would actually have to be activated. They could probably be activated the Monday after the Vikings game. Unfortunately, obviously, we're all hoping to possibly see him this weekend, but I'm definitely not discouraged or upset about this because I know the Lions can hang without those guys. And on a side note, Dan did say that Jameson was running against air last week in practice, but they need to see those reps that are live. The big names that you have to take a look at, specifically the one I'm circling, is Jonah Jackson and Evan Brown, the two guards that we did not have last week, which was massive. You could see it. It was massive. And according to Dan Campbell, some good news here. He said that with Jeff Okudah and Jonah Jackson, they were currently in phase 3. Again, this was on Monday, so this was yesterday. They're currently in phase 3 of concussion protocol, so he seems optimistic that those two guys will be ready for this weekend. And also Evan Brown dealing with the ankle injury. We didn't have an update there, but getting Jonah back potentially, and the other one is Jeff Okudah, who did not play last week against the Bills. He did get in that place, get to see Mike Hughes do pretty well, so that was the positive to come out of that. There is some good news within all of this, and a couple of little roster moves that the Lions mentioned. Have signed James Houston to their active roster, the defensive end that last week, the rookie that had 2 sacks last week on Josh Allen. It was his first time playing. Now he's been signed to the active roster, and Charles Harris has hit IR. Very unfortunate. We haven't seen much Charles Harris this season since the beginning of the year, so now he's on injury reserve. That stinks. We'll keep an eye on it because we have guys like Josh Pascal. We'll see where he's at. This was depth for us last week. I didn't go through all the defensive film for the All-22 yet for this Bills game, but what I remember, I don't think he played much on base downs. It was more specifically sub packages and special teams, so that's kind of what he was utilized for. Now, they have also made a couple practice squad tweaks. They have released wide receiver Josh Johnson off the practice squad and signed a cornerback in his place, James Johnson. I don't think this is a big concern maybe with this cornerback unit. I hope it's not, but him sounding pretty optimistic that Jeff is going to play, I don't think that's a huge concern there. Look at this Rams draft pick. Currently, that sits at number 3 in this upcoming year's draft, which is massive. Now, as you can see, a lot of teams are very tight here record-wise. They're 3-8, we're 4-7, and they have the 3rd pick in the draft. So there's not a lot of gap between a lot of these teams, and this could absolutely shake up if the Rams won a couple of games to close out the season. It seems pretty likely that Houston will probably end up with the number 1 pick, and you have a team like Chicago that could definitely work their way out of the number 2 pick. But what's unfortunate for the Rams right now is it has been reported that Stafford may be out for the season. I'm not saying he is. I've read that. Cooper Kupp, who's dealing with a serious injury. He had surgery on his ankle. And then on top of of that, he was placed on IR for that 2 weeks ago, I believe. Then on top of that, Aaron Donald may not even play this weekend. So they're dealing with a lot on their end. It's looked rough. Perkins got the start last week. It did not look great. It was kind of hard to watch, to be honest with you. We'll see where this goes. Again, I think Houston's probably going to end up with #1 pick. The Rams, we'll see. I mean, you take a look at the Rams' upcoming schedule. You have Seattle, which is going to be difficult. The Raiders, who just came off a win, that one's going to be difficult. The Packers, the Broncos, the Chargers, and then Seattle once again. So I'm not sure how many of those would realistically be wins. I mean, if they had, their quarterback out there and probably Cooper Kupp, I would say they're probably going to pull a few of those off. But without those guys, who even knows? So I think this will probably move around a little bit. You have a team like Chicago that may get out of that #2 spot. We'll see there. Having Justin Fields makes a big-time difference, but, their defense isn't fantastic. So we'll see where it goes. But what's massive about this is that this obviously would give the Lions a lot of options. And I'm not going to go into specific like draft names and things like that. It's too early. I haven't got that deep into the process. I've seen a few players, done some reports on guys, but I'm not that deep into it yet. But when you take a look at it, the Lions, of course, would have a lot of options. I mean, if they could somehow end up with, which feels like it could definitely end up being at least a top 5 draft pick, the first thing that comes to mind is what Miami did just in 2021 when they traded their #3 draft pick away to the San Francisco 49ers to go up and get Trey Lance, who were sitting at #12 in that year's draft. They traded up with them. They gave him tons of draft capital. They gave him their #12 pick and then also a future first and another future first-round pick and a third-round pick that season. So they gave up a lot to go get Trey Lance. We'll see if that's going to work out. I don't think I was the biggest Trey Lance guy, so, we'll see how that plays out. But then also on top of that is that what they flipped that into, Miami, has flipped that into basically Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, and now Bradley Chubb. Now, there's been a few more picks that have been thrown in. Draft capital that they acquired has basically, the top picks have basically been flipped into those guys plus a little bit more. And it has clearly helped them turn things around. Mike McDaniel's done a great job. Of course, having Tyreek has been massive. When they made that trade, they gave up a little bit more than just a 29th overall pick. But then, of course, also when they traded back to #12, they traded back up in that year's draft for Jalen Waddle, and now most recently they used one of those first-round picks for Bradley Chubb. So they've made some massive moves because of that draft pick. That's not to say the Lions will trade out, but I am saying that it's very possible that, when the draft comes around in a draft class that probably a little bit stronger at quarterback than it was last year, Bryce Young feels like he'll be the top pick. We'll see. I mean, if Caleb Williams is coming out, he probably would be. But he'll probably be the top draft pick to a team like Houston, some quarterback. So regardless, beyond that, you're feeling like, well, there's going to be someone else that's going to be available. And the Bears wouldn't take one if they're sitting there. So then it just comes down to who is at that spot, right? Would Seattle do it? I don't really know. I mean, they seem to want Geno going forward. So there's teams up here, that definitely could be interested in moving up at that point. And I don't want to get too deep into that, but that's obviously something that interest me. And then, of course, you made a draft pick, and there's going to be a lot of options if you have a high pick like this. I mean, at that point, you could be looking at the top defensive lineman off the board that you could take interior. You could go get a guy like Jalen Carter, who, of course, is a big name. There's some good ones out there, but to pair with a Lehman Hutch, blue chip defensive lineman, a guy that could fit into what they want because he has girth, but he also can get penetration. That sounds like a huge pause moment. Let's pause on that. Also, cornerback, which I feel like cornerback maybe comes more into play if the Rams win a couple games and they start to fall out of the 3 spot. Maybe edge even. I mean, I don't think Will Anderson will necessarily be there at 3, but if you got to 2, maybe he's there at 3. I mean, you never know what can happen on his draft night. But if it turned into that, a guy that has 27.5 sacks to this point in the last 2 years.
Keep in mind the trade that Brad Holmes has recently made, trading away Hockenson and getting mid-round picks in return for more value where it could swing into bigger trades, but also more positions of value where we've hit on some of these mid-round picks big time.
Pretty incredible. So Lions will have options, right? Whichever way they want to go, they're going to have options, and they could go get a blue chip. Quarterback, of course, is an option for them as well, but I'm saying there's a lot of flexibility with a high draft pick like that, and it's actually seemingly working out really well for the Lions. I mean, you hate to see the injuries for the Rams, but it is working out well for the Lions on that end, and it also, you have the Lions on the flip side who are still competing and saying, hey, we can make this playoff push. It's still very legitimately possible, as we're going to see, but then you also have a team like the Rams that are playing bad, and they're missing guys, and they have a lot of issues going on there with their O-line, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to get better very fast. I mean, Seattle seems difficult. They could beat the Raiders. They definitely could beat Green Bay. We'll see who's even at quarterback for Green Bay. Seems like Rodgers is going to try to give it a go this weekend. Denver definitely could be a win. Chargers probably not. Seattle, I mean, they could. But my point is, if this ended up being a top 5 draft pick, you're feeling really good about that. Now, into this playoff machine, let's talk a little bit about this playoff machine and what it looks like. So, again, I'm not going to give you an exact scenario because we'd be here forever. And there's a lot of ways that, this could happen. But just what we kind of need to focus on, I think, if you're saying, how can the Lions get in? Let me put myself in the middle of the screen. How can the Lions get in the playoffs? Well, this is last week results. This is Thanksgiving weekend. We lost to the Bills. That was difficult. But I think when you look at all the teams, and actually, let me get a clear one here. I think when you look at all the teams, who's in those current spots, and you see how many wins they have, and you're like, oh, man, that looks difficult. How are the Lions going to break into this, where Washington's the 7th seed, and they're 7-5, right? They got the Giants, and, of course, Dallas, who has the tiebreaker, and they're 8-3. How are the Lions going to get into that? Well, there's a couple things they got to keep in mind here, and also San Fran, who just took the lead of this division, but then you also throw Seattle into the mix, who also beat us. So you're like, how in the world is our Lions going to get into that mix? Of course, the first thing is that Dallas, Giants, and Washington all have to play each other. Specifically, Washington and Giants play each other 2 times over the next 3 weeks. So something's going to happen there, whether they split, whether one team kind of wins them both. Also, the point is that the Lions have a tiebreaker on both of those teams, so that's massive as well, where if the Lions, had the same record as one of those 2 teams and that came down to the last spot, they would get in because they have the tiebreaker on both of those 2 teams. They don't have it over Dallas or Seattle. Now, I think realistically, when you're looking at the Lions, you want to say 9 wins feels like, yeah, you're going to have a legit shot to get in. Running the table would give you a great chance if you went 10-7, which I don't think is impossible. I really don't. Lions' upcoming schedule is Jaguars at home, Vikings at home, Jets on the road, which is going to be difficult, Panthers on the road, Bears, and then Packers on the road. I mean, definitely I feel like we can win a lot of those games. The Packers, they may not even have their starting quarterback. We'll see what situation they're in then. Not to count them out, but they may not actually, be playing for anything at that point, assuming that the Lions would be in this scenario. Chicago Bears at home, we beat them once. I definitely think we could beat them again at home specifically. The Panthers, they look like an absolute disaster, even though they just won. They just won with Sam Darnold, but they look like a disaster. The Jets, that's going to be difficult. We'll see. Is Mike White still the quarterback by that time? Is it someone different? Up to that point, I was like, I don't know if they can score. And then they beat the Bears 31-10, but the Bears defense isn't great, and there was no Justin Fields. The Vikings, obviously we can play with the Vikings. We saw that. We probably should have beat them on the road, but of course I don't want to go back down that, down that road, but we know how that one played out. We didn't go for it. We were up by 3. We kicked a field goal, missed a field goal. They ended up going down and scoring a touchdown. We broke down a coverage, and there you go. You lost that game. Then, of course, Jacksonville this upcoming weekend at home coming off a loss, which is going to be the biggest one to get that momentum back because the Lions were playing at a certain energy level in a certain way these last few weeks, taking care of the ball, playing with fantastic energy. I mean, they were bringing it up into this Bills game. So if they can carry that into Jacksonville and bounce back, I think that does everything for them going forward. So it's absolutely possible Lions can win, 9 games. You could still get in with 8 wins. I'm sure you could probably still get in with 7 somehow. 8 is possible, but you need a lot more to go right. The 2 teams, of course, that I circle and say it's probably the most likely losses of these 6 is the Vikings and Jets. It doesn't really matter which one you win. If you can split those and then win the rest, you're in a really good spot at 9-8. You just need to jump into that number 7 spot. Now, San Fran and Seattle, the way that I look at it is I say, okay, I look at a team like Dallas and say, look, let them beat the other teams, let them roll. They're not going to win their division probably. Now they'll compete, they may win it. Who knows? I mean, if Philly loses a couple, they could win the division still. But regardless, I don't think you're realistically catching either of those teams without having the tiebreaker either, and they're 8-3. So that one's going to be difficult. It's still possible. Like, I don't even account the fact that you could still catch the Vikings, even though that's super unlikely. It's possible, but it's just very unlikely. They have to win out. They'd have to basically lose out. So the Dallas team's kind of out of reach. Philly's out of reach pretty much. Okay, then you have Tampa Bay and Atlanta kind of competing there for a final spot potentially. 5-7 at this point. Tampa Bay's 5-6. One team's going to win that. I think a lot of people think it's going to be Tampa Bay. And this one I end up with Atlanta. But either way there. So that one of those 2 teams, of course. And then you have the NFC East teams, which are the Giants, which is Washington. Now Seattle, it's another team that I say, look, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if they kind of took off a little bit and they just went on and took the number 6 seed because we don't have that tiebreaker there. Currently, they are in a position at 6-5 where, yeah, they could fall off. I look at their upcoming schedule, though, where it's Rams, Panthers, Niners, Chiefs, Jets, Rams, and say, okay, Chiefs, they could definitely lose that game. Niners, they could definitely lose that game. But Rams, Panthers, Jets, Rams, 3 or 4 maybe, but I feel like they'll probably win 4 of those. But for us to catch Seattle, they wouldn't be able to win that many games. Unless we ran the table, they were going to have to lose multiple of those games. If you go week by week, the way that I'm looking at it, in this case I have us going 9-8. we beat Jacksonville this weekend. You can see the Giants on here, and one of these two teams have a bye. Them splitting. Now, the issue could become if the Giants end up winning both of those matchups. I don't think they will. I think it's more likely that Washington wins both. And again, if they do that, which I have the home teams winning, Washington wins the next time. If they won both, it wouldn't necessarily hurt us in this scenario because that would put Washington at 9 wins based on how this is set up. But that could be an issue if they ended up winning both of those games. So you could look at a team like the Niners and say, okay, what if the Niners fell out of it? Well, the Niners play the Dolphins, which could be a loss. The Bucks could be a loss. We'll keep an eye on that one. I have them winning versus the Bucks. You have Seattle, which could be a loss. You have Washington, which could be a loss, but I would say they win that game. Raiders could be a loss, but I would say they win that game. Cardinals could be a loss, but I would say they win that game. Even though I don't buy San Fran as much as others, it does feel like they're kind of rolling a little bit and they're going to end up getting in. I mean, yeah, they could fall apart. They're 7-4. They could fall apart and you could get in over them, but I just feel like if you're going by odds, the odds are probably better that San Francisco doesn't fall apart and one of these other teams do, like the Giants and Washington. They start to slow down and kind of come back to earth. Washington's won 6 of their last 7. I think Heineke's actually a pretty good quarterback, so I like what I've seen out of him. But the Giants as well, like I don't really... I could see those two teams falling back a little bit. I have Tampa Bay beating the Saints. I try to go with what I think would happen. I mean, this one doesn't really matter. We'll say the Vikings. I try to go with what I think would happen, right? Falcons, I even gave them the win here over the Pittsburgh Steelers. Bears and Packers, I mean... Look, we got to take care of our divisional games if we're going to make the playoffs, so you're kind of knocking those teams down regardless. So these don't really matter because if you're losing to the Bears and Packers, you're going to make it really difficult. Let's just say, let's go the Bears. I don't know. Okay, week 14. Here we go. Now, this is the week that Washington has their bye week, I believe. Yes, Giants play Philly. Now, you need the division leaders, to win this game, right? You need them to win this game. You can see here, you have to have a team like the Giants winning these games. You have to have a team like Philly winning these. When Philly plays any of these teams, they got to beat them. Same thing with Dallas. I'm rooting for them. Again, could flip it. You could say, well, Dallas falls apart, and Dallas only has 8 wins. If they, lost... If they only won 1 game on the way out and we won out, yeah, we could take their spot, but it just doesn't seem likely. So I would say root for the division leaders, root against the wild cards. I mean, Dallas has Texans. Are Dallas losing the Texans? Probably not. All right, so let's just take Dallas in that situation. Niners and Tampa. This one could go either way. Yeah, Tampa could win this game, and then it changes some things up, and they could fall back a little bit. That's possible, right? If Tampa beat them, and then you come back and you say, okay, let's say Washington beats them as well. All right, there you go. Boom. Now you're still in, and Tampa and San Fran moves out, and you move up a seed, and Washington gets in as well because you have their tiebreaker. That stuff's possible. But it seems unlikely to me that there would be the team that kind of fall apart. Continue, Philly beating the Giants. Okay, we already touched on that one. And, Cardinals, you can always root for them to lose. That wouldn't be bad against AFC teams. And then Seattle beating Carolina. Again, you don't want them to win. It seems like a game, though, that they probably will win. So I try to keep it realistic. If I'm picking, the other team all the time, then it's not going to be realistic. Week 15, here we go. Lions and Jets. This is a big one. I mean, again, this one doesn't really matter. Lions, I think they just need to get 1. Okay, I feel like you really only can realistically afford 1 win out, 1 loss out. You could lose 2, but it's probably not going to help you greatly, but it doesn't really matter which team that they lose to. If it came down to Jets or Vikings, you just got to split them. You got to split one of the two, I think. But in this scenario, I'm saying that the Lions end up beating the Jets, which is the AFC team, to try to make it a little bit different. The Jets. All right, I got Seattle beating the Niners. I actually do think that somewhere San Fran's going to lose. I mean, they could win out. They could run the table. It's possible. I just don't think it happens. I think they're going to lose somewhere in here, so I have them losing to Seahawks. And then, again, Washington and Giants, I have them splitting. You continue. Lions and Panthers, very winnable. I mean, if you're going to make the playoffs, you got to win that game. It's just a position you put yourself in. You didn't win close games early this year. Ever since we started to get some DBs back, we're winning close games now. You got to win these. I mean, you put yourself in a spot where you can't really afford to lose to a team that you're not supposed to lose to. Sounds weird, but if you're going to make the playoffs, you're not supposed to lose to Panthers. It's just not supposed to happen. On the road, doesn't matter. Tokyo, don't matter. Can't lose that game. You didn't set yourself up to be able to afford to lose a game like that. Here they win. Now, Seattle, yeah, they could beat the Chiefs, right? See? But I don't think that's going to happen. I'm taking the Chiefs in this situation. Vikings, root for the Vikings. Sounds terrible. I mean, if Vikings end up losing out, but then we'd still have to win a lot of games to still make up that spot. So root for the Vikings to beat the Giants. I don't like playing for the wild card, but I'm trying to be a little bit realistic and just say, look, Vikings beat the Giants. Okay, look, Vikings, take care of your business. Yeah, root for the Cards. I mean, we will see. I mean, that one may not matter unless the Cards get really hot, which I don't think will happen. And, then you move on to Week 17. beating the Bears. Got to beat the Bears.
Now, with a team like the Cowboys here, you can see it has a loss on the Titans. It wouldn't be the worst thing to say, okay, root for the Cowboys to beat the Titans. I know we don't like rooting for the Cowboys, but in this scenario, since I'm saying we're not catching the Cowboys, root for the Cowboys to win this. That way, when it comes down to the end of the year, the Cowboys are still playing for that potential 1 seed, or for the division lead, I should say, over Philly, which means that they're not going to be resting guys the final week of the season where there's wildcard implications that could affect us.
Beating the Cardinals. The big ones, though, San Fran, I have them beating the Raiders in this situation. This is a big one. This is the one I kind of circle because initially you're looking at this, you're saying, oh, man, this one, they're winning that game. But the more I look at it, you're probably going to have Deshaun Watson on the field. Hopefully the Browns do. Hopefully the Browns are like, oh, let's not play him. We're not playing for anything. The Browns just beat Tampa Bay, which doesn't look great. It's like, oh, that's an NFC team. But what it actually could do is it could keep the Browns live longer, where it comes to the point where week 17 they're still playing starters. All this stuff could be, that could be good for us. It could end up being good because the Browns could still be playing for some. They could put Deshaun out there, and they could absolutely beat Washington. I don't doubt that. So, root for a team like the Browns to beat them. Giants beating the Colts, I just feel like that's probably going to happen. Here, yeah, root for the Vikings, keep pushing down the Packers. Seattle beating the Jets. Yeah, if they lost, that's great, but I have them beating the Jets. And then finally, you have week 18 where we play the Packers. They may not be playing starters, so I got us winning that one. And then you have the Giants and Eagles. This one, if you do take the Giants, as you can see, it pushes us out. So this is why you need Philly to win, unless the Giants just fell apart and lost a game that they weren't supposed to against Indy, which is who they played this week, right? Giants played Indy. Yeah, unless they lose a game like this, which they probably won't, root for the top team. And the good thing, again, could be here is that Dallas keeps winning. Why do you want that to happen? Well, you don't want Dallas to, lock up a wild card spot and be like, all right, we're good. Probably wouldn't happen, but if they keep in that race for number 1 and they're like a game or 2 out and this game matters to them, that's great. You would love for these games to all matter to both these teams. You'd love to go in week 18 and say, look, Dallas and Philly are fighting for the 1 seed. Fantastic. Works for me. They're fighting for the 1 seed. I'm here for it. So that means they both knock out both of the NFC East teams. That's what would be great for us. So I'm cool. Root for Dallas to win. They knock each other. That way they knock these two teams out. And then you have San Fran and Cardinals. I'm giving San Fran the nod there. So again, I don't think we're catching them. And Seattle, I think, would beat the Rams just where they're at right now. And by this time, I don't think they would have their quarterback out there anyway. So that puts us at 9-8. Now, if we run the table, yeah, our scenarios get a lot better, more likely to get in. What I'm trying to show is that it's not impossible for the Lions to get in. Lions can still get a 6 seed. Yeah, if they ran the table, it would obviously open up a lot more for them. Let's say they end up winning out. Then you make yourself a little bit more comfortable getting in, but you can afford some other things going on here. Like, for example, the Giants winning an extra game. The Giants win an extra game. Oh, well, we still have the tiebreaker. So you get a little bit more clarity there. But realistically, I think you're aiming for 9 wins. You got games coming up that you're probably, I think by win percentage, the Lions would finish 8-9, which would put in that spot. So they really kind of need one upset win, which was, I think they'll be favored to win at home versus the Jags. Vikings, they probably won't be, and same thing with Jets, we'll see there. But you got to get one of those two, in my opinion. So beat the Jags, split with the next 2, and then you have the Panthers, which should be a win. You have the Bears at home, which should be a win if you're a playoff team. And then you finish off with the Packers, who may not be playing starters. So it's very realistic the Lions can win 9 games, and I think if you do that, a lot of things open up as possible. An idea of where the Lions are still at with everything. Moral of the story is you want to root for all the wildcard teams to lose. I'm rooting for the division winners. I'm cool with the Vikings keep winning. Again, if we won out and they lost out, that'd be that would work out for us. We win the division because they only got 9 wins. But it's probably not going to happen. One of those losses would be us. Probably won't happen. So I'm going to say, okay, probably not going to lose out. Keep Dallas and Philly in it to the end there, and then have Washington and the Giants lose. And I would think the best scenario is probably for those two to split. Washington and Giants too the next 3 weeks. Probably the best scenario is to split, because if one team like the Giants wins both of them, it could put more pressure on us if they don't slip up somewhere to, say, Carolina, right? So that'd be the issue. Now, if Washington ended up winning both of those games, as we can see here, it may not make a massive difference. You can see it may not make a massive difference because of how their schedule plays out, but I don't think we want the Giants winning both of those. And I don't think they will. I think the Giants are probably the worst team with that good of a record. With that being said, just kind of a look at the playoffs picture, where the Lions draft pick falls at. I mean, this is about as good as you could get. Lions are in the hunt technically. They're still very much alive, even though the records don't look fantastic. They're still very much alive. You have a lot of ground, and really a lot of things are in front of you. You have a lot that you can control going forward.
And the biggest goal, of course, is just making the playoffs. I mean, we feel like we can compete with pretty much everybody because we have with Philly, Dallas, Vikings. But wouldn't it be something to get the Vikings round 1 in Minnesota? I would love our chances in that game with the rematch.
Oh, trade, could be quarterback, wherever you want to go with it. You know where I stand on all that, but we'll get more into that when the offseason hits. Point being, you're going to have flexibility. And if you have a top 3 pick, that value is tremendous. We saw a team like Miami basically take that, and it basically changed their franchise going forward. So that could be the Lions. And with how well Brad has done with these draft picks, I mean, could you imagine taking a dog on the defensive line, put him next to Hutch with a Lee McNeil? Stop, man. I don't even. Come on, man. Could you imagine somehow Will Anderson was sitting there and we're going to make a decision on Romeo, but my goodness. I mean, are you serious? The flexibility would be endless. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.